Let me ask you, though, about your thoughts about where the Jets are. I mean, people feeling a little bit better about the plight of the team after that win on Saturday night and Calgary's loss. Certainly a little bit better in the playoff standings. But are we just seeing the regression to the mean of where people thought the Winnipeg Jets were? Or is this, unfortunately, deja vu for a team that has had some pretty unfortunate second half swoons over the course of the last 4 or 5 seasons?
I think it's probably a little bit of a blend of both, Huss, to be totally honest. And it hasn't been great these last 6 weeks. But, I think when you look at where this Jets team is and who they have in net, the truth is, no matter what, it's operation get into the playoffs, first and foremost. And, I hate to speak out of turn and start etching a team's epitaph, but the Calgary Flames, you can more or less stick a fork in them and their playoff hopes. The math is daunting. You can see it in the players' faces on their bench. That, to me, hasn't looked like a team that's been right all season long. And does anyone honestly think that the Nashville Predators are suddenly going to rebound into a playoff team at this point? I don't. I think the field is set in the West. And regardless of how the Jets have sort of been up and down on this roller coaster in the last 6 weeks, the real fact of the matter is that they're going to be a tough out in the playoffs, regardless of who they face. And I think the West is so wide open that it more or less doesn't really matter so long as I think you can avoid the Colorado Avalanche in round 1. Short of that, I don't really care who you face and what building, when it is. You play it on Mars if you want. This team, I think, is still going to be a ridiculously tough out. So, it doesn't really matter right now. You'd like to see the team playing more consistently, but I think when it's all said and done, they're going to be just fine.
Now, let's talk about the Jets at the deadline. And it was, fascinating to hear from people in our chat and certainly from people on social media. And I'm not sure whether, I think a big part of it was that the Jets had, been in first place. They had a really good first half of the season that raised expectations. We all know what's coming for the Winnipeg Jets, some huge decisions and possibly some massive turnover. When we got to the deadline, I was sort of expecting they'd try to add something to the top 6 and maybe a couple players in the bottom 6. They got Nemetsnikov, and that was it. How did you see the Jets going into the deadline? Were you surprised that maybe they weren't more active, or did they make a couple prudent moves to help them right now without, taking too much out of what is going to be some necessary assets of potentially a big change after this season?
So you were just doing your read for your friends at Consolidated Supply there, and I couldn't help but think of one line that was specific in that read, in which they are your home for small engine parts. And that's essentially what the Jets did at this deadline, is they've added a few small engine parts to their team. That's what Vlad Nemetsnikov is. That's essentially what Nino Niederreiter is at this point in his career. They're support pieces for a group that is, I think, pretty well constructed up front. Where I was a little bit surprised to see them get through Friday was to not add just a little bit of a different element on the back end. Like, that's the one thing that really stands out to me. Is we can talk about Josh Morrissey and the incredible season that he's had and some of the other guys on the Jets, defense core. Outside of Brendan Dillon, like, who's a guy that really has some brawn and muscle and brings some bite to your back end? And that, to me, is one thing that's sort of sorely missed. You can account for the occasional hit from Neil Pionk, for instance. It's not a group that's intimidating. And not to say that that's the end-all, be-all, but I just felt like that was one part of this Jets team that was missing and that was never really accounted for. And when I say that, that's not me being critical of the Jets' overall deadline, because I think the truth is, as you've watched everyone else really go crazy, particularly in the East, where it's going to be a steel cage death match in the first couple rounds, the Jets kept their powder dry for the most part, which is a shock to no one who's watched this team closely under Kevin Cheveldayoff. It's that I don't know how many true difference makers were out there. People have been so critical, for instance, look in the East, of the Carolina Hurricanes in the last couple of days. They swung big on Timo Meier, and what I loved about their deadline was when they didn't get him, they just turned around and said, okay, we have $10 million in cap space. We're going to add a free piece and Jesse Puljujarvi here to weaponize our cap space. And we're going to add a 50-point defenseman in Shane Gostisbehere as a value addition. And in one of his first games with the team over the weekend, he chips in 3 power play points. And so you take the team that was the best team in the NHL since January 11th, an 800-plus points percentage, and you've added 2 lowercase additions to their team. Now, I get it if you're a Jets fan today that's sitting here saying, well, hold on a second. Our team has been in a rut of late. We were in first place for a good chunk of the year. We're not any longer, and it seems like we're sputtering along. Who's going to help drag us out of that? And the answer that I would have to you is there is no knight in shining armor that's going to suddenly show up in Winnipeg and grab this team and carry them forth. I didn't see it evaluating the market. I think there was the potential for some longer term, bigger picture, 30,000 foot view, reshaping the core of this team. But those are all conversations that are going to be had in the summer and groundwork to lay for then. So if you think of one guy that I mentioned over the last couple of weeks with the Jets was Ivan Provorov. Like, we know that they were interested in Provorov going back a couple years to the conversations when Patrick Laine was traded. You're probably not pulling off a Provorov trade right at this exact moment in time. That's a summer thing. And so once the big name, big piece acquisitions went off the board, I kind of thought it was a prudent move for the Jets to sit back, as frustrating as that may be for the fan base, to say, we've got bigger fish to fry later on.
Did you get a sense, though, that the Jets were working on anything bigger that didn't come to fruition? We'd certainly heard their names involved in the Chychrun deal. And the Chychrun one is a player that I think in a lot of markets people were quite enamored with. He'd been on the trade block seemingly for a year. And that got amplified when he went to Ottawa for much less, I think, than most people thought that he would go for, Frank.
Yeah, and it also feels like a really good fit for the Sens in the sense that that's a market he really wanted to go to. And not to say that he had any control in the matter. Mm-hmm. He wanted to go to a team that has a chance to win at some point, unlike the Coyotes, which feels like, forever off in the distance. The Coyotes and winning, it's kind of like that sign that you post in the bar that says free beer tomorrow. Like, when is tomorrow exactly? No one's really sure. But his sister lives in Ottawa. His grandpa lives in Ottawa. This just seemed his summer home is in Ottawa. This just seemed to connect a lot of dots for Jakob Chychrun, and the Sens were able to smoke out the Coyotes on the price, waiting until the last minute. I don't know that the Jets were ever very seriously involved in Chychrun. I don't think that they were ever very seriously involved in Ivan Provorov or anything else. I think what they did is they monitored the market and monitored pricing. And when they found that they were able to get someone like Niederreiter for a second-round pick and able to do it in a way that doesn't disrupt the future really, and you have him for another year with term on his deal, that just seemed to align. And so it seemed to me that they always had one eye on this deadline, but also Huss on the future as well.
Well, and of course the future. I mean, we've heard enough from people that are pretty tied in that Pierre-Luc Dubois won't be long for Winnipeg. I mean, do you see the way we've often talked about a 2-year window, or people mention a 2-year window with the end of these contracts, but I've always thought, Frank, that it was a 1-year window. It was this year, because after this year, you need to figure out what's going on with Hellebuck. You need to figure out what's going on with Dubois, the future of Mark Scheifele. Because for a team and an organization like the Winnipeg Jets that doesn't, go heavy into free agency, I would suggest that if those players are not going to be re-signing with you, you need to figure out the best way to maximize those assets. And I would suggest that around this year's draft might very well be the case for one or more of those players.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree in your view of the window and also how significant and important this summer is for the Winnipeg Jets. However, that brings us back to this trade deadline and the thought process of, how exactly would this unfold? And my question to you, and it's not a rhetorical one, like I actually want to engage in a bit of a conversation with you about it, is like, so let's give you a hypothetical. Ryan O'Reilly, he gets traded to the Toronto Maple Leafs. He's obviously hurt now, out probably for the next 3 to 4 weeks with a fractured finger. But the data suggested that Ryan O'Reilly gives the Toronto Maple Leafs an additional 0.5% chance to win the Stanley Cup. And that was viewed and heralded as a significant acquisition for the Leafs. Is there someone legitimately out there that you felt moved on the market that would have been a true game changer for the Jets? And really, like, what would have put this team over the top and greatly or significantly changed their chances?
Well, I mean, listen, I think the key part of that question is put them over the top. I mean, I don't think there was a player. The one player that was the most intriguing to me that did move at a very significant cost was Timo Meier. And I know people will say, well, you know, he's a guy that would come in, they engaged and he didn't want to re-sign. I'm not sure that you wouldn't have been able to trade him at the draft for a similar package if he wasn't going to sign with potentially a team that would have been able to extend him.
Not only that, but you'd be able to just give him, he's under team control. Say, you know what, we're giving you the $10 million qualifying offer, whether you like it or not. And we're bringing you back if you're Winnipeg. And at the same time, that might mean that we're saying goodbye to Pierre-Luc Dubois because he wants out anyway. There's our cap space to go do it.
Well, for sure. And again, if you do find out that this guy is also going to be one of the players that isn't long, I mean, the GM is really going to be earning his money, assuming it's Kevin Cheveldayoff, with these future deals because, you basically are the steward of the future of this organization right now. And so much of it is going to depend on what happens, either re-signing or what you get back for those players. And listen, it would be essentially adding another potential problem to that list. But in the meantime, it would certainly make you better. But Frank, I mean, and this was where I was at kind of as we, week by week, basically from the middle of January until right now, I didn't have a lot of confidence, basically, to paraphrase it, that this team was going to be a, quote, true Stanley Cup contender with any of those players coming in because
doesn't that make your point in the sense that, like, the fan base was up in arms saying, when is Kevin Cheveldayoff going to wake up? When are they going to do something? Hello, what's happening here? I'm with you. Like, I don't view the Jets as they were on the positive side of the ledger compared to the Calgary Flames in the same spot on the other side, which is, we have a team that if they get in could do some damage, but is it really worth going out and going absolutely crazy to add to this team when it's probably not going to significantly alter our chances one way or the other?
And that is, I think, where they end. But that being said, I thought that the Niederreiter deal, as far as what was given up and compared to the other deals, might have been one of the best value deal as well. And I'll tell you what, Nemetsnikov, albeit a bottom six player, they needed a big boost in the bottom six. He played his first game, and all of a sudden, guys that haven't scored in a month are scoring, and he was impactful defensively. He was an improvement there. I thought they might get another player or two in that sort of mold or role, but they didn't. Bottom line is they got a big win.